The storm came in low and sudden over the Montana plains, swallowing the horizon in a sweep of charcoal clouds. Daniel Mercer had lived on his ranch long enough to read the sky like a book, and this one promised cold rain and a restless night. He had just secured the last gate when he noticed a figure standing near the edge of his land, just beyond the broken fence post that marked the boundary between wilderness and home. She stood still despite the wind whipping her dress around her legs. For a moment, Daniel thought she might be a trick of the light, some lonely mirage conjured by years of silence. But then she swayed, steadying herself against the gale, and he knew she was real. He didn't shout, didn't demand answers. He simply walked toward her with measured steps. "You'll freeze out here," he said once he was close enough to see the fear in her eyes. "Come inside." She hesitated, studying his face as if weighing the risk of trusting him against the certainty of the storm. Rain began to fall in sharp, slanting sheets. Finally, she nodded. Inside the cabin, warmth wrapped around them. Daniel stoked the fire and handed her a thick wool blanket. She accepted it with trembling hands. Mud streaked her boots, and there were faint bruises on her wrist, half hidden beneath the sleeve of her dress. "What's your name?" he asked, keeping his tone even. "Clara," she replied, barely above a whisper. "I'm Daniel." He poured her a cup of hot coffee. "You're safe here, Clara." The words seemed to settle something inside her. She sat at the wooden table, fingers curled tightly around the cup, eyes darting occasionally toward the window as if expecting shadows to gather there. Daniel didn't press her. He'd learned long ago that forcing words from someone only built higher walls. After his younger brother Samuel disappeared 8 years earlier, Daniel had spent months asking questions no one could answer. He had chased rumors across state lines, only to return with empty hands and a heavier heart. Eventually, silence became easier than hope. Clara stayed the night. In the morning, she offered to help with chores. Daniel watched her from a distance as she fed the chickens, her movements careful but determined. She worked as though she needed to prove her worth, as though being useful was the only way to secure her place under his roof. Days turned into a week. The bruises on her wrist faded from purple to yellow. She spoke little, but when she did, her voice carried a quiet strength. Daniel noticed she avoided the main road and never strayed far from the cabin alone. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the fields, he found her standing near the fence line, staring into the distance. "Expecting someone?" he asked gently. "No," she said too quickly. He leaned against the post beside her. "You don't have to stay if you're running from something. I won't hold you here." She looked at him then, her eyes sharp with something deeper than fear. "I'm not running." "Then what are you doing?" She opened her mouth but closed it again, shaking her head. "I just needed time." "For what?" "To be sure. Of me." Her silence answered him. That night, Daniel lay awake longer than usual. He wasn't angry at her caution. In truth, he respected it. Trust wasn't something given lightly on the plains. It was earned through storms survived and fences mended side by side. The moment everything changed came on a cold morning thick with frost. Daniel was in the barn repairing a saddle strap when Clara stepped inside. The air smelled of hay and leather. She stood near the doorway for a long time before speaking. "Do you have any family?" she asked. The question caught him off guard. "Not anymore." "A brother?" His hands stilled. "I had one," he said slowly. "Samuel." The way her breath hitched made his heart pound. She stepped closer, her face pale. "You still think of him?" "Every day." His voice tightened. "Why?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Because he talked about you." The world seemed to tilt. "That's not possible," Daniel said, though the certainty in his tone faltered. "Samuel's been gone 8 years. I met him 3 years ago," she whispered. "In Wyoming. He was working cattle near Cheyenne. He told me about this ranch. About an older brother who carried the weight of everything on his shoulders." Daniel's grip on the saddle strap loosened. "You're lying." "I'm not." Her voice broke. "He told me if anything ever happened to him, I should find you." A cold dread seeped into Daniel's bones. "What happened?" Clara's hands trembled. He discovered the ranch foreman was stealing from the operation. When he confronted them, it turned ugly. They didn't mean for it to go as far as it did, but, she swallowed hard. They beat him. He didn't survive the night. The barn fell silent except for the faint rustle of hay. Daniel felt as if the ground had given way beneath him. For years, he had imagined Samuel riding somewhere under a different sky, alive but unwilling to return. The truth was crueler. "Why didn't you come sooner?" he asked hoarsely. "I was afraid," she admitted. "I saw what they were capable of. Samuel protected me when things started turning bad. After he was gone, they began asking questions about me. I ran. It took me years to find the courage to come here." Daniel's gaze drifted to the fading bruises on her wrist. "They hurt you. They tried to scare me into silence. And now I don't want to be afraid anymore." Daniel turned away, pressing a hand against the rough wood of the stall door. Grief rose in his chest like a tide, mingled with anger and regret. He should have found Samuel. Should have searched harder. But regret didn't change the past. He faced her again, his expression resolute. "You're not leaving. I don't want to cause trouble." "You didn't." His voice hardened. "They did." She looked at him, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. "What if they come here? Then they'll find I'm not the kind of man who lets his family be hurt twice." The word family hung between them. Clara's lips parted slightly. "He loved you," she said softly. "He spoke of you like you were his anchor." Daniel swallowed against the sting in his throat. "He was always the brave one," he murmured. "Guess he thought I'd know what to do." Outside, the wind swept across the fields, bending the tall grass in steady waves. The ranch no longer felt like a lonely outpost of memory. It felt like something alive again, something worth defending. That evening, Daniel cleaned his old rifle and checked the locks on the barn. Not out of vengeance, but out of responsibility. Clara sat by the fire, her shoulders no longer hunched with the same crushing fear. He had taken her in without questions. But the name she whispered had answered the one question he'd carried for 8 long years. And now, he wasn't alone in carrying it anymore. The first sign that trouble had found them was not the sound of hoofbeats or the sight of dust rising on the horizon. It was the way the horses grew restless before dawn, shifting in their stalls and snorting at shadows that did not belong. Daniel Mercer had always trusted animals more than men. So when he stepped onto the porch in the gray hush of early morning and felt the air sitting too still against his skin, he knew Clara's fear had not been imagined. She joined him a moment later, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "You feel it too," she said quietly. He didn't answer right away. His eyes scanned the distant fence line, the open stretch of land that had once felt like protection in its isolation. Now it felt exposed. "Go back inside," he told her. "I'm not hiding. You won't be hiding. You'll be safe." Her jaw tightened, but she obeyed. By mid-morning, the dust appeared. 3 riders approached at an unhurried pace, as if they had all the time in the world. Daniel recognized the type before he could make out their faces, men who believed the law bent to whoever held the strongest fist. He stood in the yard waiting for them, hat low over his brow, rifle resting loosely in his hand but not yet raised. They stopped a few yards away. The man in the center, broad-shouldered with a scar splitting his lower lip, looked Daniel up and down with open disdain. "Morning," the stranger called. "Fine piece of land you got here." "It serves me well," Daniel replied evenly. "State your business." The man's eyes flicked toward the cabin. "We're looking for someone." Daniel didn't blink. "Lots of someones in this world." "A woman," the rider continued. "Traveling alone. Goes by Clara." The name hung in the air like a drawn blade. "No woman here," Daniel said. One of the other men chuckled. "Now that's a shame. We were hoping she'd come to her senses and stop running." Daniel shifted his stance slightly, planting his boots firm in the dirt. "If you've got no other business, you can turn those horses around." The scarred man's smile thinned. "You don't want to lie to me, rancher. That girl's mixed up in something that don't concern you. It concerns me if you ride onto my land threatening what's mine." A flicker of irritation crossed the man's face. "She owes us." "For what?" "For sticking her nose where it didn't belong." Daniel felt the heat rise in his chest but kept his voice steady. "You've said enough." For a long moment, no one moved. Wind brushed across the fields, carrying the faint scent of rain. Finally, the leader leaned forward in his saddle. "You'll regret protecting her." Daniel's gaze hardened. "You're trespassing." The message was clear. After a tense silence, the riders pulled their reins and turned away, but not before the scarred man cast one last look toward the cabin window. Daniel didn't lower the rifle until they disappeared beyond the ridge. Clara stepped outside seconds later, her face pale. "They found me. They suspected," Daniel corrected. "Now they're testing." Her hands trembled. "They won't stop. Neither will I." She looked at him with something deeper than fear now, guilt. "This is my fault." "No," he said firmly. "It's theirs." Samuel stood up to them. "That's why they're angry. Not because you did wrong." At the sound of his brother's name, the air shifted between them. It had been days since Clara had told him the truth. In that time, grief had settled into Daniel like a quiet, smoldering coal. It didn't blaze outward, it burned inward. "He would have come back for you," Clara said softly. Daniel stared at the horizon. "I used to imagine that. Thought one day he'd ride over that hill grinning like he always did." He exhaled slowly. "Guess he found something worth fighting for instead." "You were worth fighting for too," she said. He didn't respond. That night, Daniel reinforced the barn doors and checked the perimeter twice. Clara refused to sit idle. She helped stack extra firewood inside and filled every lantern with oil. "You don't have to do this alone," she told him. "I've been alone a long time." "You're not anymore." The words settled heavily in his chest. The attack came after midnight. Glass shattered as a rock tore through the cabin window. The horses screamed in panic. Daniel was already awake, rifle in hand before the second crash echoed through the yard. "Stay down," he ordered as Clara dropped beside the hearth. A shot rang out from outside, splintering wood near the door. Daniel moved toward the wall, calculating angles the way his father had once taught him. He fired a warning shot into the air first. "Leave now." Laughter answered him. Another bullet tore through the siding. Daniel's jaw tightened. He stepped to the window's edge and fired low, aiming for the ground near the men's boots. A shout followed, then chaos, horses rearing, curses slicing through the dark. Clara crawled toward him despite his command. "They'll burn it," she whispered. They threatened that once before. Not this ranch, Daniel thought. He moved fast, slipping out the back door under cover of darkness. Years of working this land gave him advantage. He knew every dip and shadow. Circling wide, he approached the riders from the side. The scarred leader dismounted, torch in hand. Daniel didn't hesitate this time. "Drop it," he called from behind them. The man spun, but Daniel already had the rifle trained steady on his chest. "It ends here," Daniel said. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the space between them. The leader studied his face, calculating. Then, slowly, he let the torch fall into the dirt. "This ain't over," he muttered. "It is tonight." The other two men backed their horses away. Within seconds, they were riding hard into the darkness, leaving only churned soil and the fading echo of hooves. Daniel stood still long after they were gone. When he returned inside, Clara rushed to him. "Are you hurt?" "No." He set the rifle down carefully. Her hands hovered near his arms, unsure where to touch. "I never meant for this." He looked at her fully then. Not as a burden or a responsibility tied to his brother's memory, but as someone who had endured fear alone for far too long. "You brought truth to my door," he said quietly. "That's not something I regret." Tears filled her eyes. "They'll come back. Maybe," he admitted. "But next time, it won't be in the dark. I'll ride into town at first light. Sheriff needs to hear about this." She studied him. "You're choosing this fight. I'm choosing family." The word hung steady between them. Outside, the wind calmed. The ranch, scarred but standing, felt different now, not just a place of old memories but of new purpose. Samuel's name had once been a wound too deep to touch. Now it was a promise. Daniel had taken her in without questions. But after she whispered the one name he never expected to hear, he understood that protecting her wasn't charity. It was loyalty, and this time, he would not let his family disappear into silence again.